On Sunday, the 26th of July, two things happened in China, about 1,500 kilometers apart. A typhoon made landfall on the coast of Guangdong province at 10 minutes to 4 in the morning. It was the strongest typhoon to hit China this year. More than 800,000 people had been relocated ahead of it. As far as the reporting shows, it killed nobody in that province. 10 hours later, in a narrow valley in Gansu province, inland, northwest, far outside the storm's track, a flash flood swept through a scenic area full of campers. 10 people were killed and 23 injured. Within 24 hours, headlines around the world had combined those two events into one. Typhoon Noul kills 10 in southern China. I want to be precise about what went wrong, because it is not what most people assume, and the actual mechanism is more interesting and more useful than a story about lazy journalists. Here is the part that surprised me. Most of the outlets that ran that headline had the correct information in the article. If you scrolled past the headline, you would find a sentence stating plainly that rain-triggered flash floods killed 10 people in a scenic area in Gansu province. The body copy was right. The headline was wrong. And the two sat on the same page, contradicting each other for anyone who bothered to read past the first line. In the next 25 minutes, I'll separate the two events properly, show you exactly where in the publishing chain the error was introduced, explain the mechanical reasons it happens on every fast-moving disaster story, identify who got it right and what they did differently, and cover a second set of errors in the same coverage that nobody has flagged at all. And then I'll explain why this matters more than a pedantic correction. Because the merge did not just get a fact wrong, it made both real stories invisible. Let's separate them cleanly first. Event 1. Typhoon Noul, the 12th named storm to affect China this year, and the third landfall in about a month. It came ashore in Weiyuan County, Huizhou City, Guangdong province, at approximately 3:50 in the morning local time, with maximum sustained winds around 162 kilometers per hour. The National Meteorological Center had issued a red typhoon alert on Saturday evening, the 1st of 2026, and stepped it down to orange and then yellow through Sunday as the storm weakened inland. Reported damage, uprooted trees, a partially collapsed scaffolding structure in Hong Kong, flooding, and mass transport cancellations. Hong Kong canceled more than 410 flights and around 150 high-speed train services, and its Home Affairs Department opened 28 temporary shelters. At least 9 people were injured there. The National Disaster Relief Response for Guangdong was set at Level 4, the least severe of 4 tiers. The National Development and Reform Commission allocated 100 million yuan for recovery, earmarked for roads, water conservancy facilities, schools, and hospitals. Event 2. At around 2 in the afternoon on Sunday, a flash flood triggered by sudden heavy rainfall struck the Shuangshimen scenic area in Weiyuan County, Dingxi City, Gansu province. Tourists were camping there and were trapped when the water burst through. 10 dead and 23 injured as of 6 o'clock that evening. Mingguo, head of Dingxi's Fire and Rescue Detachment, reported that at least 240 people were evacuated from the scenic area, and 7 were rescued alive from trapped vehicles. A rescuer at the scene described the floodwaters widening a nearby river to more than 30 meters at its widest point, with the fast-moving, debris-laden torrent hampering the search. The National Flood Control and Drought Relief Headquarters activated a Level 4 flood control response for Gansu. 2 events, different provinces, different mechanisms, different agencies responding, no causal link established by any official source. Now, where did the error come in? Look at how the sentences sit next to each other in a typical wire-derived article. A paragraph about Typhoon Noul making landfall in Guangdong. Then a paragraph beginning, rain-triggered flash floods killed 10 in China's Gansu scenic area, according to Xinhua. Then a paragraph about the Level 4 response for Guangdong. Every individual sentence is accurate. The Gansu sentence names the province. Nothing in the copy claims the typhoon caused it. but the two events are adjacent, in one article, under one dateline, on one day. And somewhere between that copy and the front page, someone has to compress the whole thing into 8 words. The compression is where it dies. 10 dead plus typhoon landfall in one article becomes typhoon kills 10. It is not a lie anyone consciously told. It is the arithmetic of a headline field with a character limit applied to an article containing 2 separate stories. And here is why that matters so much more than it used to. Most people never read the article. They read the headline in a feed, form an impression, and move on. Some share it. The share carries the headline, not the body. So the correct information sits in paragraph 4 of a piece that 90% of its audience never opens, while the incorrect summary travels. There are 3 mechanical pressures that make this near inevitable on a story like this. The first is the wire structure. Agency copy is often written as a roundup covering multiple related events under one topic. In this case, severe weather in China on a given day. That is a sensible way to file. It becomes dangerous the moment a downstream editor needs one headline for a piece with 2 subjects, because a roundup has no single subject. The second is the aggregation chain. A story like this passes through many hands. Agency, to national outlet, to regional outlet, to aggregator, to social account. Each step compresses further, and each step inherits the previous step's headline rather than the original copy. By the 4th link, nobody is looking at the Xinhua Bulletin. They are rewriting someone else's rewrite. The third is time. Both events broke inside the same news cycle, on a Sunday, competing with a typhoon landfall that was already the day's big story. Under that pressure, the flood becomes a detail inside the typhoon story, rather than its own story, because the typhoon is the frame that already exists. Notice that none of those require anyone to be dishonest or careless. This is a systems failure, and it will happen again on the next event, in exactly the same shape. So who got it right, and what did they do differently? The Associated Press and ABC News reported the 2 events as separate incidents, with the Gansu deaths flagged distinctly. At least one outlet running Xinhua and Reuters copy put the province directly into the headline, a flash flood killing 10 and injuring 23 in a scenic area of Gansu, with the typhoon's landfall mentioned as the same day context rather than the cause. That is the whole fix. One word, Gansu, in the headline, and the error becomes impossible. And the specialist outlet The Watchers went further, stating explicitly that some media reports had linked the flooding to Typhoon Noul, that no official authority had confirmed such a connection, and that based on information released by Chinese authorities, the event was a localized heavy rain event producing rapid mountain flooding, independent of the typhoon. That is what accuracy looks like on a fast story. Not more words, just the location in the headline, and a willingness to state what has not been established. Now the errors nobody has flagged, because there were others in the same coverage. The first is the evacuation figure, which was reported as a single fact when it was actually a moving number. On Saturday, the figure was around 340,000. By later reporting, it was more than 700,000. One outlet published 715,351, a precise sounding number that was accurate for the moment it was captured. By Sunday, it exceeded 801,000. None of those is wrong. They are timestamps. But they were mostly published without timestamps, which means readers encountering different articles saw wildly different figures for the same event and had no way to reconcile them. If you read one piece saying 340,000 and another saying 801,000, the natural conclusion is that somebody is lying. Nobody was. The evacuation was still running. The second is the response level, and this one is genuinely confusing even for careful readers. You will find coverage stating that China activated a level 4 response, the lowest tier, and other coverage referring to a level 2 response across southern China. Both can be accurate, because China does not run one emergency system. It runs several in parallel. There is a 4-tier meteorological warning system, color-coded blue to red. There is a separate 4-tier flood control and typhoon prevention response, where level 4 is the lowest and level 1 the most severe. There is a 4-tier geological disaster response for landslides. And there is a 4-tier national disaster relief response. Different ministries, different ladders, different provinces, all active during the storm at different levels. So a headline saying China issues highest red alert and a headline saying China activates lowest level response are both true, describing different systems entirely. Read together without that context, they look like a contradiction, which is exactly the kind of gap that conspiracy narratives grow in. Now let me get to why any of this matters, because I do not think this is pedantry. The merge destroyed 2 stories at once. If you believe the typhoon killed 10 people in Guangdong, then the first story becomes unremarkable. Storm hits China, some people die, move on. What you miss is that the strongest typhoon to hit China this year made landfall on a coastline holding over 100 million people and killed effectively nobody there, because more than 800,000 people were moved out of the way in about 48 hours. That is a genuinely extraordinary outcome, and it went almost entirely unexamined internationally. Because the headline said the storm had killed people. And the second story disappears completely. 10 people died in a valley, in the middle of a Sunday afternoon, in a place where no warning system could realistically have reached them in time. That is a hard, important story about the limits of disaster prediction, and it was absorbed into a typhoon report as a casualty figure. Both of those are more interesting than the version that ran. The error did not just misplace 10 deaths geographically. It replaced 2 significant stories with one boring wrong one. There is a third thing the merge hides, and it is the one with the longest reach. Gansu is not an unusual place for this to happen. In August 2025, flash floods in Weiyuan County in the same province killed 10 people, with 33 missing and around 4,000 stranded. Different county, different year, near identical toll. The reason is geology. Much of Gansu sits on the lowest plateau, hills and gullies of wind-deposited silt, one of the largest such formations on the planet. Loess erodes easily and becomes unstable when saturated, which makes the region persistently vulnerable to both flash flooding and landslides. That province has a long record of severe weather disasters, including the 2010 Joke debris flow that killed over 1,400 people, and an ultramarathon in 2021 where 21 runners died in sudden cold and gale force winds. So the correct framing of Sunday's flood is not that a typhoon killed 10 people. It is that a recurring regional hazard in one of the most flash flood-prone landscapes on Earth killed 10 people at a tourist site on a summer weekend. That framing suggests obvious questions about where campsites are sited and what warning infrastructure exists at scenic areas. The typhoon framing suggests none of them. That is the real cost, not an incorrect fact. A set of questions that never got asked. Let me be fair about the limits of my own account here, too. I am working from published reporting, and I do not have access to every newsroom's decision-making. Some outlets may have corrected their headlines after publication. Corrections rarely travel as far as the original. Some of the pieces I have seen may have been updated since, and the underlying facts remain provisional. Casualty figures after flash floods move as search areas widen, and the Gansu toll may not be final. I would also say clearly that this is not a story about one country's media being uniquely bad. This same compression happens on every fast disaster story in every language. It happened during the European wildfires this month, where evacuation totals from 2 countries were merged, split and re-merged across outlets within hours. So here is what I would actually suggest you take from this, practically, next time a disaster crosses your feed. First, check whether the headline names a place. Disaster headlines that name a country but not a province or city are the ones most likely to have merged something. 10 dead in China is a warning sign. 10 dead in Weiyuan County, Gansu is a fact. Second, look for the timestamp on any number. Evacuation figures, casualty counts, and damage estimates on live events are snapshots. A figure without a time attached is not a fact. It is a moment. Third, if two outlets give wildly different numbers, assume a timing difference before assuming deception. That is almost always what it is. Fourth, when you see an official response level cited, check which system it belongs to. Highest alert and lowest response can coexist, and usually do. And fifth, read one paragraph past the headline. On this specific story, one paragraph would have been enough. The correction was sitting right there in the copy, under a headline that contradicted it. Here is what I'll be watching. The first is the final Gansu toll. 10 was accurate as of 6 o'clock Sunday evening. Numbers after mountain torrents move and missing persons figures reported separately are the better predictor of where the total lands. The second is whether any corrections are issued on the merged headlines. My expectation is very few, and that is worth noting rather than assuming. The third is the inland impact from Noul itself, across Jiangxi, Hunan, Hubei, and further north, where the rain persisted for days after landfall. If deaths occur there, they will be genuine typhoon deaths, and they will arrive after most of the coverage has moved on. The fourth is whether the work team dispatched to Gansu publishes findings on warnings and site sighting at the scenic area. I want to end on the image that stays with me. Somewhere on Sunday, an editor had an article on their screen containing two sentences. One said a typhoon had made landfall in Guangdong. The other said a flash flood had killed 10 people in Gansu. They had one headline field and a deadline, and they wrote the thing that both sentences appeared to add up to. 10 people died in a canyon in northwest China that afternoon. And the international record of how they died is, in a great many places, wrong. Not because anyone lied, but because two true sentences were sitting next to each other and somebody had to make them fit in one line. That is how most misinformation actually works. Not conspiracy. Compression. We'll be watching the final figures.